Let's continue covering in depth the fascinating North American exploits, momentous discoveries, monumental battles, and adventurous sagas of Count Frontenac and New France under the Sun King Louis XIV.
Frontenac and Duchesneau, 1675 to 1682. Having given the principal charges of the Intendant Duchesneau against the Governor Frontenac, it is time to give those of Frontenac against Duchesneau. Frontenac showed, it is true, no sign of that change of conduct which the king had demanded, but he appealed to his allies at court to use fresh efforts to sustain him. Among the rest, he had a strong friend in the Maréchal de Bellefonds, to whom he wrote in the character of an abused and much suffering man. You exhort me to have patience, and I agree with you that those placed in a position of command cannot have too much. For this reason I have given examples of it here such as perhaps no governor ever gave before, and I have found no great difficulty in doing so, because I felt myself to be the master. Had I been in a private station, I could not have endured such outrageous insults without dishonor. I have always passed over in silence those directed against me personally, and have never given way to anger, except when attacks were made on the authority of which I have the honor to be the guardian. You could not believe all the annoyances which the Intendant tries to put upon me every day, and which, as you advise me, I scorn or disregard. It would require a virtue like yours to turn them to all the good use of which they are capable. Yet great as the virtue is which has enabled you to possess your soul in tranquillity amid all the troubles of the court, I doubt if you could preserve such complete equanimity among the miserable tumults of Canada. Governor Frontenac also complains that all the coureurs de bois would be brought to submission but for the Intendant and his allies, who protect them and carry on trade by their means; that the seigneurial house of Duchesneau's partner, Lachenay, is the constant resort of these outlaws; and that he and his associates have large storehouses at Montreal, Ile Saint-Paul and Rivière-du-Loup, whence they send goods into the Indian country, in contempt of the king's orders. Frontenac also complains of numberless provocations from the Intendant. It is no fault of mine that I am not on good terms with M. Duchesneau, for I have done everything I could to that end, being too submissive to your Majesty's commands not to suppress my sharpest indignation the moment your will is known to me. But, sire, it is not so with him, and his desire to excite new disputes in the hope of making me appear their principal author has been so great that the last ships were hardly gone when, forgetting what your Majesty had enjoined upon us both, he began these dissensions afresh in spite of all my precautions. If I depart from my usual reserve in regard to him, and make bold to ask justice at the hands of your Majesty for the wrongs and insults I have undergone, it is because nothing but your authority can keep them within bounds. I have never suffered more in my life than when I have been made to appear as a man of violence and a disturber of the officers of justice, for I have always confined myself to what your Majesty has prescribed, that is, to exhorting them to do their duty when I saw that they failed in it. This has drawn upon me both from them and from M. Duchesneau such cutting affronts that your Majesty would hardly credit them. In 1681, Seignelay, the son of Colbert, entered upon the charge of the colonies, and both Frontenac and Duchesneau hasten to congratulate him, protest their devotion, and overwhelm him with mutual accusations. The Intendant declares that, out of pure zeal for the king's service, he shall tell him everything. Disorder, he says, reigns everywhere. Universal confusion prevails throughout every department of business. The pleasure of the king, the orders of the Supreme Council, and my ordinances remain unexecuted. Justice is openly violated and trade is destroyed. Violence, upheld by authority, decides everything, and nothing consoles the people, who groan without daring to complain, but the hope, Monseigneur, that you will have the goodness to condescend to be moved by their misfortunes. No position could be more distressing than mine, since, if I conceal the truth from you, I fail in the obedience I owe the king, and in the fidelity that I vowed so long since to Monseigneur your father, and which I swear anew at your hands. And if I obey, as I must, His Majesty's orders and yours, I cannot avoid giving offense, since I cannot render you an account of these disorders without informing you that M. de Frontenac's conduct is the sole cause of them. Frontenac had written to Seignelay a few days before. I have no doubt whatever that M. Duchesneau will, as usual, overwhelm me with fabrications and falsehoods, to cover his own ill conduct. I send proofs to justify myself, so strong and convincing that I do not see that they can leave any doubt. But since I fear that their great number might fatigue you, I have thought it better to send them to my wife with a full and exact journal of all that has passed here day by day, in order that she may extract and lay before you the principal portions. I send you in person merely the proofs of the conduct of M. Duchesneau, in barricading his house and arming all his servants, and in coming 3 weeks ago to insult me in my room. You will see thereby to what a pitch of temerity and lawlessness he has transported himself, in order to compel me to use violence against him, with the hope of justifying what he has asserted about my pretended outbreaks of anger." The mutual charges of the two functionaries were much the same, and so far at least as concerns trade, there can be little doubt that they were well founded on both sides. The strife of the rival factions grew more and more bitter. Canes and sticks played an active part in it, and now and then we hear of drawn swords. One is reminded at times of the intestine feuds of some medieval city, as, for example, in the following incident, which will explain the charge of Frontenac against the intendant of barricading his house and arming his servants. On the afternoon of the 20th of March, a son of Duchesneau, 16 years old, followed by a servant named Vautier, was strolling along the picket fence which bordered the descent from the upper to the lower town of Quebec. The boy was amusing himself by singing a song, when Frontenac's partisan, Boisseau, with one of the guardsmen, approached, and as young Duchesneau declares, called him foul names, and said that he would give him and his father a thrashing. The boy replied that he would have nothing to say to a fellow like him, and would beat him if he did not keep quiet, while the servant Vautier retorted Boisseau's abuse, and taunted him with low birth and disreputable employments. Boisseau made report to Frontenac, and Frontenac complained to Duchesneau, who sent his son, with Vautier, to give the governor his version of the affair. The bishop, an ally of the intendant, thus relates what followed. On arriving with a party of friends at the chateau, young Duchesneau was shown into a room in which were the governor and his 2 secretaries, Barrois and Chasseur. He had no sooner entered than Frontenac seized him by the arm, shook him, struck him, called him abusive names, and tore the sleeve of his jacket. The secretaries interposed, and, failing to quiet the governor, opened the door and let the boy escape. Vautier, meanwhile, had remained in the guard-room, where Boisseau struck at him with his cane, and one of the guardsmen went for a halberd to run him through the body. After this warm reception, young Duchesneau and his servant took refuge in the house of his father. Frontenac demanded their surrender. The intendant, fearing that he would take them by force, for which he is said to have made preparation, barricaded himself and armed his household. The bishop tried to mediate, and after protracted negotiations young Duchesneau was given up, whereupon Frontenac locked him in a chamber of the chateau and kept him there a month. The story of Frontenac's violence to the boy is flatly denied by his friends, who charged Duchesneau and his partisans with circulating libels against him, and who say, like Frontenac himself, that the intendant used every means to exasperate him in order to make material for accusations. The disputes of the rival factions spread through all Canada. The most heinous offense in the eyes of the court with which each charged the other was the carrying of furs to the English settlements, thus defrauding the revenue, and, as the king believed, preparing the ruin of the colony. The intendant farther declared that the governor's party spread among the Indians the report of a pestilence at Montreal, in order to deter them from their yearly visit to the fair, and thus by means of coureurs de bois obtain all their beaver skins at a low price. The report, according to Duchesneau, had no other foundation than the fate of 18 or 20 Indians who had lately drunk themselves to death at Lachine. Montreal, in the meantime, was the scene of a sort of by-play in which the chief actor was the local governor, Perrault. He and Frontenac appear to have found it for their common interest to come to a mutual understanding, and this was perhaps easier on the part of the Count, since his quarrel with Duchesneau gave sufficient employment to his natural pugnacity. Perrault was now left to make a reasonable profit from the illicit trade which had once kindled the wrath of his superior, and the danger of Frontenac's anger being removed, he completely forgot the lessons of his imprisonment. The intendant ordered Mijon, bailiff of Montreal, to arrest some of Perrault's coureurs de bois. Perrault at once arrested the bailiff, and sent a sergeant and 2 soldiers to occupy his house, with orders to annoy the family as much as possible. One of them accordingly walked to and fro all night in the bedchamber of Mijon's wife. On another occasion, the bailiff invited 2 friends to supper, Le Moine d'Iberville and one Boutier, agent of a commercial house at Rochelle. The conversation turned on the trade carried on by Perrault. It was overheard and reported to him, upon which he suddenly appeared at the window, struck Boutier over the head with his cane, and chased him while he fled for his life. The seminary was near at hand, and the fugitive clambered over the wall. Dollier de Casson dressed him in the hat and cassock of a priest, and in this disguise he escaped. Perrault's avidity sometimes carried him to singular extremities. He has been seen, says one of his accusers, filling barrels of brandy with his own hands and mixing it with water to sell to the Indians. He bartered with one of them his hat, sword, coat, ribbons, shoes, and stockings, and boasted that he had made 30 pistols by the bargain, while the Indian walked about town equipped as governor.